reply. "He's downstairs. He sleeps there. He's probably up by this time. He sleeps usually till 1 o'clock in the daytime, being up all night." "Do you supply gas for your tenants?" "Both gas and electricity are included in the rent of the suites. Tenants may use one or both." "And the gas all comes through 1 meter?" "Yes, 1 meter. It's just off the engine room." "I suppose there's no way of telling just who in the house uses gas?" "No. Some do and some don't. I don't know." This was what Hatch had told the scientist. Now, together, they went to the basement, and there met the night engineer, Charles Burlingame, a tall, powerful, clean-cut man of alert manner and positive speech. He gazed with a little amusement at the slender, almost childish figure of the thinking machine and the grotesquely large head. "You are in the engine room or near it all night, every night?" began the thinking machine. "I haven't missed a night in 4 years," was the reply. "Anybody ever come here to see you at night?" "Never." "It's against the rules." "The manager or a hall boy?" "Never." "In the last 2 months?" the thinking machine persisted. "Not in the last 2 years," was the positive reply. "I go on duty every night at 7 o'clock, and I'm on duty until 7 in the morning. I don't believe I've seen anybody in the basement here with me between those hours for a year at least." The thinking machine was squinting steadily into the eyes of the engineer, and for a time both were silent. Hatch moved about the scrupulously clean engine room and nodded to the day engineer, who sat leaning back against the wall. Directly in front of him was the steam gauge. "Have you a fireman?" was the thinking machine's next question. "No, I fire myself," said the night man. "Here's the coal," and he indicated a bin within half a dozen feet of the mouth of the boiler. "I don't suppose you ever had occasion to handle the gas meter?" insisted the thinking machine. "Never touched it in my life," said the other. "I don't know anything about meters anyway." "And you never drop off to sleep at night for a few minutes when you get lonely, doze, I mean?" The engineer grinned good-naturedly. "Never had any desire to. And besides, I wouldn't have the chance," he explained. "There's a time check here," and he indicated it. "I have to punch that every half hour all night to prove that I've been awake." Dear me!" exclaimed the thinking machine irritably. He went over and examined the time check, a revolving paper disc with hours marked on it, made to move by the action of a clock, the face of which showed in the middle. "Besides, there's the steam gauge to watch," went on the engineer. "No engineer would dare go to sleep. There might be an explosion." "Do you know Mr. Weldon Henley?" suddenly asked the thinking machine. "Who?" asked Burlingame. "Weldon Henley." "No," was the slow response. "Never heard of him. Who is he?" "One of the tenants on the second floor, I think." "Lord, I don't know any of the tenants. What about him?" "When does the inspector come here to read the meter?" "I never saw him. I presume in daytime. Eh, Bill?" And he turned to the day engineer. "Always in the daytime." "Usually about noon," said Bill from his corner. "Any other entrance to the basement except this way? And you could see anyone coming here this way, I suppose?" "Sure I could see him. There is no other entrance to the cellar except the coal hole in the sidewalk in front." "Two big electric lights in front of the building, aren't there?" "Yes, they go all night." A slightly puzzled expression crept into the eyes of the thinking machine. Hatch knew from the persistency of the questions that he was not satisfied, yet he was not able to fathom or to understand all the queries. In some way they had to do with the possibility of someone having access to the meter. "Where do you usually sit at night here?" was the next question. "Over there where Bill's sitting. I always sit there." The thinking machine crossed the room to Bill, a typical grimy-handed man of his class. "May I sit there a moment?" he asked. Bill arose lazily, and the thinking machine sank down into the chair. From this point he could see plainly through the opening into the basement proper. There was no door, the gas meter of enormous proportions through which all the gas in the house passed. An electric light in the door made it bright as daylight. The thinking machine noted these things, arose, nodded his thanks to the two men, and, still with the puzzled expression on his face, led the way upstairs. There the manager was still in his office. "I presume you examine and know that the time check in the engineer's room is properly punched every half hour during the night?" he asked. "Yes, I examine the dial every day. I have them here, in fact, each with a date on it." "May I see them?" Now the manager was puzzled. He produced the cards, one for each day, and for half an hour the thinking machine studied them minutely. At the end of the time, when he arose and Hatch looked at him inquiringly, he saw still the perplexed expression. After urgent solicitation the manager admitted them to the apartments of Weldon Henley. Mr. Henley himself had gone to his office in State Street. Here the thinking machine did several things which aroused the curiosity of the manager, one of which was to minutely study the gas jets. Then the thinking machine opened one of the front windows and glanced out into the street. Below 15 feet was the sidewalk. Above was the solid front of the building, broken only by a flagpole which, properly roped, extended from the hall window of the next floor above out over the sidewalk a distance of 12 feet or so. "Ever used that flagpole?" he asked the manager. "Rarely," said the manager. "On holidays sometimes, 4th of July and such times. We have a big flag for it." From the apartments the thinking machine led the way to the hall, up the stairs and to the flagpole. Leaning out of this window he looked down toward the window of the apartments he had just left. Then he inspected the rope of the flagpole, drawing it through his slender hands, slowly and carefully. At last he picked up a slender thread of scarlet and examined it. "Ah!" he exclaimed. Then to Hatch, "Let's go, Mr. Hatch." "Thank you." This last to the manager, who had been a puzzled witness. Once on the street, side by side with the thinking machine, Hatch was bursting with questions, but he didn't ask them. He knew it would be useless. At last the thinking machine broke the silence. "That girl, Miss Renee, was murdered," he said suddenly, positively. "There have been 4 attempts to murder Henley." "How?" asked Hatch, startled. "By a scheme so simple that neither you, nor I, nor the police have ever heard of it being employed," was the astonishing reply. "It is perfectly horrible in its simplicity." "What was it?" Hatch insisted, eagerly. "It would be futile to discuss that now," was the rejoinder. "There has been murder. We know how. Now the question is, who? What person would have a motive to kill Henley?" 3. There was a pause as they walked on. "Where are we going?" asked Hatch, finally. "Come up to my place, and let's consider this matter a bit further," replied the thinking machine. Not another word was spoken by either until half an hour later in the small laboratory. For a long time the scientist was thoughtful, deeply thoughtful. Once he took down a volume from a shelf and Hatch glanced at the title. It was "Gases, Their Properties." After a while he returned this to the shelf and took down another, on which the reporter caught the title "Anatomy." "Now, Mr. Hatch," said the thinking machine in his perpetually crabbed voice, "we have a most remarkable riddle. It gains this remarkable aspect from its very simplicity. It is not, however, necessary to go into that now. I will make it clear to you when we know the motives. As a general rule, the greatest crimes never come to light because the greatest criminals, their perpetrators, are too clever to be caught. Here we have what I might call a great crime committed with a subtle simplicity that is wholly disarming, and a greater crime even than this was planned. This was to murder Weldon Henley. The first thing for you to do is to see Mr. Henley and warn him of his danger. Asphyxiation will not be attempted again, but there is the possibility of poison, a pistol shot, a knife, anything almost. As a matter of fact, he is in great peril. Superficially, the death of Miss Renee, the maid, looks to be suicide. Instead, it is the fruition of a plan which has been tried time and again against Henley. There is a possibility that Miss Renee was not an intentional victim of the plot, but the fact remains that she was murdered. Why? Find the motive for the plot to murder Mr. Henley, and you will know why. The thinking machine reached over to the shelf, took a book, looked at it a moment, then went on. The first question to determine positively is, who hated Weldon Henley sufficiently to desire his death? You say he is a successful man in the street. Therefore there is a possibility that some enemy there is at the bottom of the affair, yet it seems hardly probable. If, by his operations, Mr. Henley ever happened to wreck another man's fortune, find this man, and find out all about him. He may be the man. There will be innumerable questions arising from this line of inquiry to a man of your resources. Leave none of them unanswered. On the other hand, there is Henley's love affair. Had he a rival who might desire his death? Had he any rival? If so, find out all about him. He may be the man who planned all this. Here, too, there will be questions arising which demand answers. Answer, then, all of them, fully and clearly, before you see me again. Was Henley ever a party to a liaison of any kind? Find it out, too. A vengeful woman, or a discarded sweetheart of a vengeful woman, will go to any extreme. The rumor of his engagement to Miss Lipscomb, Hatch supplied. The rumor of his engagement to Miss Lipscomb might have caused a woman whom he had once been interested in, or who was once interested in him, to attempt his life. The subtler murders, that is, the ones which are most attractive as problems, are nearly always the work of a cunning woman. I know nothing about women myself, he hastened to explain, but Lombroso has taken that attitude. Therefore, see if there is a woman. Most of these points Hatch had previously seen with the unerring eye of a clever newspaper reporter. Yet there were several which had not occurred to him. He nodded his understanding. "Now, the center of the affair, of course," the thinking machine continued, "is the apartment house where Henley lives. The person who attempted his life either lives there or has ready access to the place, and frequently spends the night there. This is a vital question for you to answer. I am leaving all this to you because you know better how to do these things than I do. That's all, I think. When these things are all learned, come back to me." The thinking machine arose as if the interview were at an end, and Hatch also arose reluctantly. An idea was beginning to dawn in his mind. Does there occur to you